Hello, everyone, and happy International Women's Day. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join us for our wonderful little chat and celebration of a day that recognizes and honors women worldwide and all of our awesome contributions. I'm Kimberly Adams. I'm a host at Marketplace of Make Me Smart, our podcast, which I do with Kai Risdall, and also our senior Washington correspondent. And on the APM side of things, I also host our mental health series of specials called Call to Mind. And all of those things are things that definitely affect women, include women, and I'm so excited to talk to everybody about that today. And for that, I am joined by my wonderful colleagues, Meredith Morbey, who is the senior producer at Marketplace Morning Report. Hey, Meredith.
Hi, Kimberly.
And we've worked together over the years and had loads of fun, as I have had with Reema Khrais, who is the host of our Marketplace extremely successful podcast, This is Uncomfortable, which is about life and how money messes with it. Hey, Reema.
Hey, Kimberly. Happy to be here today.
Awesome. And one of the reasons that we asked y'all here today is to ask you for your help. You know, the work that we do at Marketplace, sharing economic news and stories that's relevant to all communities, including and sometimes especially women, is the only way that we can do that is with your help and your support. There are a lot of communities that get really underrepresented in financial news. And the fact that we could very easily pull together a panel of women amongst many women at Marketplace in senior positions and positions of leadership, the voices that bring that business and economic news to millions of people all over the country and all over the world, is pretty unusual for our industry. There's not all that many women doing the kind of work that we do. And we are a public newsroom, and the only way that we can do this work is through your donations and the support of our Marketplace investors and people who care about this and want this kind of news and information, not just for themselves, but also for our broader communities. And so if at all possible, it is a great day to make a gift in honor of International Women's Day. You can go to marketplace.org/donate for that. One more time. It's marketplace.org/donate. And of course, we always have the amazing swag if you want to have a look at it. But one of the things, in addition at Marketplace to having amazing women on staff who get to take our own lens to the economy, one of the things we do here is we also work to amplify the voices of women. A common complaint that we hear all the time about business and economics news is that it primarily includes the voices of men, and men as the experts and men as the leaders. This fact that most of the major CEOs in the country are men, you don't always get to hear the perspectives of women in business and economics and research and academia and in policy. And we work really hard at Marketplace to amplify the voices of women. One of the women who I've talked to a couple of times over the years is Anjana Susarla, and we're going to hear from her now.
Hi, I'm Anjana Susarla. I'm a professor of responsible artificial intelligence at Michigan State University, and I wanted to thank Kimberly Adams and Marketplace for amplifying women's voices. I'm an academic who studies technology, regulation, and responsible and ethical uses of AI. And it's a valuable opportunity to be on shows like the ones that she produces for me to talk to a broad public audience and explain the policy effects and how issues of technology regulation and surveillance impact our daily lives. It's a very valuable opportunity for me to connect to a large public audience. And I thank Kimberly Adams for amplifying, especially women academics such as myself, in her show. Thank you.
And thank you, Anjana, for sharing that video. But Meredith and Reema, I know that probably this is something that you two can relate to on a very basic level. I can't tell you how many times I'm interviewing women and they tell me it's their very first time ever having national exposure. Right, Reema?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we get that all the time. I, as you mentioned, host the podcast This Is Uncomfortable. And so we feature personal stories. It's a narrative show. And so oftentimes people I'm talking with, it's the first time they're sharing their story. And so I hear very regularly what that's like for them. It's a very vulnerable experience, but it's something that we gain their trust over multiple conversations, and ultimately share an episode that features a very intimate experience, which I can talk about a bit more later.
And Meredith, one of the things that you do on your show, and I know we also do it on the evening show, is we have a lot of power in terms of who we pick as our regulars, right?
Right. Absolutely. I mean, we have a daily market segment where we check in with the people that are experts in the field of business and the economy, and to give us a take, because we've got to do those numbers. So we have that, and we actually, we have 5 regulars for every day of the week. 4 of our regulars are women. So highlighting their achievements.
Right. And if you listen to our evening show and the weekly wrap, you're going to hear some amazing women journalists who, you probably won't necessarily see on your cable news shows in the same frequency. And it's something that is a dedicated priority for pretty much everyone across the shop. You're rarely going to hear a story on Marketplace unless we've had a real bad day that does not include the voice of at least one woman. But we could go on about this for ages, but I want to start answering some of the questions that we got from you all in the audience and others as people signed up. So thank you for the questions in advance. First of all, from Leroy J. We have women in some of the highest levels of economics we have women in some of the highest levels of the economics world right now. Do we see this as sustained change? I'll give my take on it, but I'd love to hear from you too as well. I think we do. We're seeing more women than ever getting advanced degrees. We're seeing more women going into economics than ever. We also have a lot more women role models in business and economics. We have, Janet Yellen at, the Treasury Department. We have new women on the Fed board. We have, women in top leadership positions in Congress on the big budget and finance committees. And I do think that we are seeing more women CEOs and women leaders of countries who now have a track record of successful economic policy. So I'm going to say yes. What do you two think?
Yeah, I was just going to echo some of those stats. I read recently that women represent about 10 to, seems like a wide range, but up to 25% of top global positions in economics, covering everything from academia and the private and public sectors. And so, we're seeing some heartening stats related to women achieving more success in this area. Even internally at our office, I mean, there are a lot of women in the office, and it's very apparent. And that comes through in our stories.
Yeah, I guess if you think about it, my boss is a woman, then her boss is a man, his boss is a woman, and our top leadership has a really great representation of women. And Meredith, what do you think?
Well, absolutely. Underscoring at Marketplace, it's one of the reasons why I love working here. But I also wanted to add just on it, when we're reporting news, like say a new bank president is named and it's a woman, I love when we don't have to include in the bio or in the news item that she's the first woman at that organization. And I feel like we're saying that less and less, which I feel is sustained.
What a great marker. How often do we not have to say that
Right.
Someone is the first fill in the blank of anything? I love that. Another question we got from Donna E. How can women use their economic power to fight back against the current restrictions on women's healthcare and reproductive rights? Wow. Meredith, I know you've been covering this a lot on Morning Report ever since the Supreme Court ruling.
Yes, I think it brings to mind, we recently had a story about abortion funds in states where there are these trigger laws, and this one happened to be in Tennessee, thanks to a wonderful freelancer that we have based there. So I think using the economic capital to invest in organizations that you believe in. I'll take a pitch for marketplace there,
Yes.
or whatever ones you are. One thing that I appreciate about marketplace reporting is that, which is a journalistic principle, is to bring both sides of the issues here. So whether it's you're giving towards a fund towards, like I mentioned, abortion, or towards a pro-life organization, I think using your funds to make your voice heard, not to sound trite, but I think women have, as Reema said, we have more capital than ever, and so using that towards the investments of what you want.
Right. And Reema, you've covered this, and I know it's been a narrative throughout the shop, is that abortion is definitely an economic issue, and women's reproductive rights has become an economic issue. I mean, from my perspective in Washington, the amount of money and lobbying going into this issue is astonishing on both sides. How is it showing up in your work?
Yeah, I mean, we, like I said earlier, we feature a lot of personal stories. And so we featured a story not too long ago about a woman and just the personal cost of getting an abortion and, having to take time off from work, having to pay for transportation, having to actually do the cost of the procedure. We're also working on a story right now about the cost of, if you don't get an abortion, but you also, I mean, this is going on a bit of a tangent, but if you decide to have a baby, just the financial implications of that, right? And we really dig into just the personal economics of that. It shows up in our reporting all the time.
Reema, if I can stay with you, I mean, your podcast is really special at Marketplace because A, it's awesome, but also B, because you bring in an audience that a lot of other Marketplace shows don't necessarily bring in as well. Younger, more diverse, more women. And it's a podcast only as opposed to a broadcast show, although I know a lot of your stories end up airing on the show. But let's talk about the industry, right?
Yeah, let's do that.
Podcasting more broadly has really been getting a lot of negative attention lately because of the toxic masculinity that is just so pervasive, and all of these sort of manosphere podcasts that are popping up with these terrible narratives that are anti-women, really anti-men when you think about it in terms of some of the things that they're encouraging. And I wonder, what has it been like for you watching the rise of that while you're also doing the work that you're doing, and you're a woman in podcasting?
Yeah, I mean, to your point, it's really upsetting seeing podcasters, social media influencers saying misogynistic things, giving a platform to people who are saying misogynistic things, basically normalizing harmful and at times violent views about women. And so, and I think personally, what I find alarming is just how quickly these messages are spreading on apps like TikTok and how they're reaching such young audiences. And so, yeah, it's disheartening to see those views take up so much space. And more than that, I think I worry about the platforms that are enabling these harmful views. And by basically doing so, perpetuating this idea that it's okay to spread misinformation or misogyny because it's profitable. And so when these voices are upheld and rewarded by companies, I wonder what that means for smaller creators who may have similar views and big ambitions, because they're getting this message that big businesses, or rather that business models will reward them. So yeah, I think, and I think that's a problem for many reasons. Most importantly, when you give space to those, to sexist voices, to anti-queer, to anti-trans voices, and they are glorified, what follows is real harm to those communities. So that worries me. And, as a podcaster in this space, our team is really intentional about centering women in our stories and their vast lived experiences and amplifying stories about everything from what it's like to navigate a misogynistic society, but also stories that feature their joys and relationships and their triumphs and their struggles, just stories about their lives. And so I think it's important to share those stories that challenge these narratives and ideologies that some loud men in this space are pushing. And so on our show over the last several years, we've had a lot of those kinds of stories. I was just taking a look back at our catalog and I was surprised myself. We've done stories featuring women who've been in financially abusive relationships and how they escape them. We've done stories about how to demand fair pay in the workplace. Also stories about how women are taking more unpaid labor at home, stories about how the pandemic is impacting the working lives of women. I could go on, stories about navigating racism and ageism in the workplace, even in your doctor's office. And then again, like I was saying, also just stories about life, being in complicated relationships and friendships. Most recently, I am really proud of this 2-part story that we did last year. Our producer, Hannah Harris Green, pitched and produced this story that features the life of Tasha Adams. So Tasha, she is the estranged wife of Stuart Rhodes. Stuart Rhodes is the guy who founded the Oath Keepers, and the Oath Keepers is the group primarily responsible for the January 6th Capitol attacks. And we talked with Tasha about her marriage and her life with Stuart. We chronicled how he, financially manipulated Tasha over the years, how he forced her to give up her career and her college savings in order to support him. And we also talked about her and her kids being isolated and how they were isolated in this cabin without, oftentimes food or financial means. And then eventually, we follow how Tasha and her children escaped. And so I think behind any big headline, there are a lot of these intimate, smaller stories. And this was an example of that, a story of someone who shared an inner world with a destructive force like Stuart. And by understanding this very terrible marriage and experience, we're also able to understand how a man like Stuart could incite the things that he did. Anyway, all to say that we were very pleased with the final story. And Tasha was too. She actually sent us a message that she wanted to share today, which I think we can play.
My name is Tasha Adams, and I want to wish everyone at Marketplace a happy International Women's Day, and in particular to the This Is Uncomfortable podcast with Reema Khrais and Hannah Harris Green. I want to thank them for giving women a voice, and really want to send my appreciation to them. They allowed me to tell my story of escape from the leader of Oath Keepers after 2 decades of a very frightening and terrifying marriage. And they allowed me to tell my story with dignity. They treated me with compassion. And really, that was the first time anyone in the media had treated my story in that way. And it really created a ripple effect where almost every media person that's contacted me since that podcast has come in with a lot more understanding and seems to be a lot more educated on the complexities of domestic violence. And it's really changed how I've been able to get my story out there, to explain to people how difficult it can be to get out of that kind of situation. And I just really appreciate them, and I think they've done a tremendous job of helping women and giving women a voice in general. So cheers to them from the northwest corner of Montana. And again, happy International Women's Day to all women.
It's really heartening to hear that message from Tasha. Like I mentioned earlier, we spend a lot of time talking to our guests. In this case, we spent probably like 6 to 7 hours talking with her over the course of several weeks because we're getting her life story. It's very nuanced. There are a lot of we're covering the span of about 20 years. And so we want to make sure we do it justice and it feels like a story that's specific to her actual experience and not just slotting anyone into that story. But also I think what I really love about the work that we do on this podcast is, yes, we are sharing very specific stories about very specific circumstances, but we're also trying to always, we're trying to also really focus on what are the universal elements, like what are the things that she's experiencing that I can relate to, that we can relate to, which are like feelings maybe of loneliness or the desire to please or the desire to be financially free, whatever it might be. And so I think those things really resonated with her story.
Yeah. It was so powerful. Like that was it. I just wanted to add what a powerful experience it was listening to that.
And it was, we're definitely proud of that work. And I'd love to, ask you, Kimberly, you are in the podcast space. You're also in the broadcast. You do it all at Marketplace, honestly. And so, you've always been very intentional about amplifying women's voices and stories in your work. I'm curious to hear a little bit more about your process. How do you make that a priority while working under very tight deadlines.
I was very interested just now when you said, what is the universal experience? And in some ways, I actually do the opposite, because I feel like in media in general, it's so common to say, well, everyone knows X, or everyone feels this, or we did this. One of the common ways this showed up is, when we were all in lockdown during the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the central questions I'm always asking in my reporting is, who is we?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm.
We weren't all in lockdown during the pandemic. A huge chunk of the country was out and about working. And there were all these stories about new hobbies that people were picking up and doing. And I remember over the holidays, the first year of the pandemic, I was hosting, and we did this little mini series about different hobbies and activities that people had picked up during lockdown. And one of the things I said at the top was, many people found themselves with a lot of time on their hands, but a lot of working parents, especially moms, found themselves with less. And I remember I heard from Lourdes Garcia Navarro, who was the host of Weekend Edition Sunday at the time, and she wrote me and she said, all year long I've been looking at people with their bread recipes and their knitting and all of these crafts and feeling so unaccomplished and less than because I didn't do it. And you're the first person who put into words that parents, and in particularly moms, didn't get to do that.
Yeah.
Because I, disaggregated that experience from the universal. And so that is often my approach, is like, if this is the narrative, is it true for everyone? Who is it not true for? And why isn't it true for them? And a lot of times that does break down by gender, and fighting off sort of these traditional narrative of how the economy works, because, the economy works one way if you're a single woman. It works one way if you're a single man. It works another way if you're a woman with kids. It works a different way if you're a man with kids. And I try to make sure that we're at least keeping in mind that those differences exist, while still trying to tell those universal stories, recognizing that not every story has to work for everybody. And in terms of sourcing, I got a really great piece of advice from Mark Garrison, who was a reporter a long time ago at Marketplace, but when I first started, and he told me something that I've really kept with me. And he said, men will always get back to you by deadline. Always, always, always. And so he would always spend the first sort of hour of his reporting reaching out to women first, because as I'm sure you two have found, often when we're reaching out to women for interviews, they are less likely to say yes.
Yeah.
I remember I reached out to a woman once who had a lawyer who had written an entire white paper on a topic, had a degree in the subject, had consulted the federal government on the subject. And when I reached out to her to ask for an interview, she said, "Oh, you really should talk to my male colleague. He's got more experience than me in this." And that's it a lot, is just saying, no, I want to talk to you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, speaking of which, Meredith, you run the morning show. What challenges do you face in ensuring that there are a wide range of diverse voices, including stories of women?
That is something that I hold really important to me, and my entire team does. I have, no offense, Reema and Kimberly have the best team at Marketplace, gotta say.
Fighting words.
I know. Well, I think the biggest hurdle that we come across is deadlines. And, sometimes when there's news that breaks overnight or while you're on the shift, Alex Schroeder, who is the overnight producer, is on the shift starting at 4 a.m. Eastern. And so often, half the world's been already awake. And so there may be a huge oil story. And so trying to get someone on the phone within minutes that can do an interview with David Brancaccio within, 20 minutes or so, and get that on air within an hour is a tall order. And so to underline what Kimberly was saying is, sometimes what we go to the people that we know frequently, and they'll get us what we need. I think one thing, a challenge that I really hold to myself is, say I put out some lines to people, and a man got back to me first or whomever got back to me first, but someone followed up within, say, later that day and was like, hey, I'm so sorry I didn't get back to you, is giving that person a call and talking with them and seeing where, so they didn't work for that morning, but where could they work for later on in the program. And I think I've also run into the situation where a lot of times women or people that identify as women want to kind of give me another name or unsure. And I think just developing that relationship, which is really what I feel is journalism at its core, is developing relationships with people so that they'll tell you their experience. And when the person can feel safe and know that their story will be treated with respect, and we're not just looking for a 20-second soundbite from them, there's a lot of trust that goes into that, and something I hold very dear, and I take a lot of pride, but also with it.
Reema, you're muted.
No
I know.
matter how long we've been doing this, it's always
It
gonna
really
happen.
doesn't.
All right. That's great, Meredith. I wanted to answer some questions. I think we have a couple more listener questions, or rather questions from the audience. So from Annie H, she asked us, do you have hope that women and people of color will have an equal place at the top? If so, in what timeline? Yes.
I mean,
go for it. I can answer this. You can go for it too, Kimberly.
hope springs eternal, but I don't know about the timeline. What are you?
I know. Well, I was poking around and I saw that according to the World Economic Forum, it's going to take about 135 years to close the worldwide gender gap. I feel like there's no way to casually say that. I've seen some other estimates that, are even more than that. I mean, the numbers unfortunately don't look great. I think, even when we look at the wage gap, it's about 82 cents earned by women for every dollar made by men. And we know that's worse among minority groups. And, as we've been talking about, the pandemic has set a lot of women back. At the time we saw upwards of 2 million women just disappear from the workforce, mostly, again, to be at home dealing with childcare. And so, it's at least heartening to know that workforce participation is, it's gotten somewhat back to pre-pandemic levels. But, women's labor force participation is still lower than that of men. And I think, the pandemic shows that when something catastrophic happens, women are often the most vulnerable. But that said, I think, we are seeing, like Kimberly mentioned at the top, we are seeing some encouraging markers of progress, like more women than ever holding political decision-making positions around the world. We're seeing more women rising to positions of power in public and private sectors. And, not that we need this justification, but and I think there's a greater recognition of this growing body of research that tells us how organizations with greater numbers of women, especially in leadership roles, just flat out perform better, right? And you have more diverse perspectives that helps with innovation and problem solving. And it's good all around. And so, yeah, I do have hope that it will happen, but it'll take work, which leads to the next question, unless anyone else wants to respond to this. So we had another question from Amelia M. She asked, gender equality can't be achieved without support from men who are in power. So what are ways to turn men in power into allies? Great question. I think I really like this question because I think oftentimes when we have these discussions, the assumption is that this is like a women's issue, right? And it's not. And so, I think everyone needs to be involved for things to change. And, a lot of the challenges are institutional. And so that, and it's also a thing that companies need to tackle. And so in terms of men, though, I think, and I'd love to hear from you all too, I'm rambling a bit, but I think men in particular need help, and they need to help amplify women's voices, but not just that, but just also creating space for them and giving them a platform also for non-binary people and people from marginalized groups. And so I think that can be as simple as speaking up in support of colleagues if they see something unfair or inappropriate happening, publicly defending anyone who is harassed or, faces the brunt of something unfair by male colleagues. Also giving credit to coworkers for their ideas and successes. So there are all these small ways. And also being an advocate for salary transparency, right? Like sharing.
I was
your
just going to
salary
say
with
that. Yes.
everyone. Yeah, I mean, that's so important. And
Meredith has a great colleague in David for this.
Oh, yes. David Brancaccio, he is a wonderful advocate for every member on the team, but just making sure that when we're on Zoom, the Zoom culture now, if someone gets interrupted, bring it back to the person who started the sentence, which is huge when you're, especially for people who may be new to the team. It just sets a precedent for respect and also just buoying up the women on the team in terms of, yes, you can speak, or not, that sounded horrible. You can speak, like you can speak, but just, making sure people feel that they are comfortable to voice how they're feeling, whether there's a guest that they have an issue with or feels like we should be going back to try again or a different voice, is important. And
Okay.
I would just say with just in terms of male allies, I would just love to hear an anecdote, and I'm just saying this out loud. If someone has a male ally ever said to a female or someone who identifies as female, it's like, okay, so you want this job within the company, here's what you've got to ask for it, and being that advocate for someone within there.
I have definitely had men at Marketplace and men in other spaces say that to me, and it does make a huge difference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Meredith, while we're with you, Reema and I are sort of like reporters in a traditional sense, but producers like you are also journalists. And I think a lot of times people think of producers as showrunners or as people doing technical things. But can you talk about how you are also a journalist in addition to being a showrunner?
Absolutely. Well, we go by the same journalistic principles that Kimberly and Reema, you're doing when you're either writing scripts or you're interviewing people to use on tape. We're looking for this sounds very basic, but that the person that we're interviewing can give us the facts and that they check out. This is someone who we have to really decide quickly, because sometimes, like I mentioned early in the morning, they may be on air within the next 20 minutes. So we've got to do a quick pre-interview and make sure that they hit our journalistic standards. I think, so in a prior job, I worked at PBS NewsHour, and Jim Lara had several journalistic principles that he would literally give out in hard copy at that point that people should maintain. One of them was do no harm. And I really hold that one. That one's stuck with me along with the other ones, but I just try to think about, when we are bringing someone on, or the stories that we're choosing, are we doing no harm? Are we pushing the narrative forward? So that through that, that's in the short of how I feel that we're journalists, but still we're waking people up with the news, and we want to make sure that it's all checks out.
When you think about voices of the women you've worked with over the years, is there somebody in particular who jumps out to you?
Oh my goodness, so many. At Marketplace or elsewhere?
I don't know. I think you have a clip of somebody you regularly work with.
Oh yes.
I was trying to gently tee you up there, Meredith.
Thank you. This is why I have a wonderful dance partner in Kimberly and Reema. So Karen Petru is the co-founder of Federal Financial Analytics, which is a DC-based firm, and she is someone we regularly turn to for deciphering Fed minutes, which if anyone's ever read those, they can be tricky, but to pull out the nuggets that are really applicable for our audience. And Karen is wonderful. In addition, she'll answer our call at 6 a.m., which is incredible. So we have a clip from her.
It's always a pleasure to be on Marketplace, particularly in the morning, because it starts the day off in terms of public understanding of what's likely to happen in the market. What I find particularly great about being interviewed on Marketplace, as opposed to the many other places that nicely call for my views, is that Marketplace reaches more of the public than some of the other more financial or economic specialized newspapers and media. So I often, as I'm out walking or going to the grocery store, hear from people who know me and say, oh, I heard you on Marketplace. And then people ask questions. So it's great for generating public debate about even complex financial and monetary policy issues. So I think that's a terrific service.
I love Karen. She's great. And like she mentioned, we have the unique placement in the mornings that we're embedded within Morning Edition. And so we have our listeners already to the wonderful programming that they have. And then we are able to tack on with 10 minutes of the economic news that they need to know, which often includes Karen. So I'm going to turn now. I've got some questions for you, Kimberly and Reema. So Kimberly, I'm going to start with you. I was talking with a colleague the other day, and we were just remarking, so your ears might have been burning, about just how much care is in your voice when you're interviewing people, and just remarking about how that is an incredible skill, and just how you're able to establish relationships with people, whether it's through call to mind, or whether it's you're doing a spot for the evening program and you've got to really get the gist of what someone's talking about quickly. But they may be talking about sensitive subjects like potentially losing their home or needing food assistance. How do you establish a connection with these people so that they get trust from you so quickly, and relay that on to our listeners?
It's a very simple thing, actually, which is that I own my ignorance. I remember I was doing a story about, you mentioned food assistance, about the increasing number of people who were going to, who had lost their jobs in the pandemic and, were struggling to afford food, right? And I ended up connecting with somebody who, at the time of the interview, was in their car in line at a food bank and had been in line at the food bank for the last 2 hours. And this was their first time ever going to a food bank. And I have no idea what that's like. And I'm so grateful that I've never had that experience. And I was just like, oh my gosh, I have no idea what that's like. That must be so hard. They're like, yeah, it is. We've never been through this either. And I just owned it. And I find that is the thing. Whether you're talking to an expert who's trying to explain macroeconomics to me, and I literally will say, and Nancy Marshall Ginzer, who used to sit next to me when we were still in the office, was laughing at me all the time, because half of my interviews are like, I don't understand that. Can you say that again? That doesn't make any sense to me. Can you please help me? I don't have a degree in economics. And so whether it's just me saying I don't understand and having people repeat it to me in a different way until I do, so that I can explain it to my listeners, that helps. And also just owning when somebody's going through a terrible experience, that it's just awful and I'm sorry and I don't know what that's like. But if you're game to talk to me about it, often what I'll say to people is I say, I really think it would help people better understand this issue if they hear from you what it's like. And it's just owning the ignorance. And I feel like that's what really helps.
It's a thing I'm going to employ more.
I like that.
Have you found that too, Reema? Is connecting with people on your podcast through that?
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think because our interviews are so long, really giving them the space to take breaks when they want to step back from the interview completely if they want to. They're doing us and our audience a service by sharing their story, but it's not something they have to do, right? And so recognizing that and making sure that, it's their story. And if they want to share it, then great. And if not, we respect that as well. And so I just try to make that very clear, and, also share things about myself too, because it's a lot for someone to just divulge their entire life to a stranger. And so it's really, a lot of it is just connecting with them like a human, like you would with anyone.
So we've got some pre-submitted questions. First, one is from Amy S. How do you choose which voices to amplify? How do you balance domestic versus international stories, urban versus rural? So that is something that is important to me. I just want to first by saying, for me as a producer, it's very important for me to amplify the voices of the women on my team. And we've got a small but mighty team, but I want to make sure that they feel included, and not just, there's a difference between diversity and inclusion, where diversity is a number, inclusion is people who are actually at the table who feel comfortable saying exactly what they feel and directions we should go. And so I really strive to have an open and honest discussion when we're, especially dealing with difficult topics, whether if it's about race, if it's about poverty, if it's about gender, and just so that we have an open area for people that they're never embarrassed to say, either I don't understand, or are we approaching this in the right way? Another thing that's important to me is that with rural versus urban, that we're not just reporting on stories that impact people on the coasts. And so one way Marketplace does have reporters that are scattered across the country, which is very helpful to bring those. We also have a tremendous web of freelancers throughout, in Colorado and in Tennessee, in Maine, in Montana, which also help with that. Reema, Kimberly, anything you'd like to add onto that?
I mean, mine were pretty much the same, but I'd be interested in Reema's take on it.
Yeah, I mean, we track our sources, right? So that's one way. After we talk with anyone, we give them a little survey to get their demographics and to make sure that as a team we are, we take a look at it and take a step back once we've talked to a lot of folks, make sure that we are covering a wide range of experiences. So, just being really intentional and practical with it in that way. And also, I think this goes back to the importance of having a diverse team, because we are a team that represents a wide range of experiences and identities. We naturally gravitate towards stories that resonate with us, that we're hearing in our own communities, among our own friends. And obviously that's not the only way, right? Like, we also want to get out of those bubbles. So we spend a lot of time, talking with experts, going on different forums, but also truthfully, that's also how we find stories too. Just what are we interested in? What are we talking about? And what are we hearing? And so, that's just some of the ways that we ensure that we have a wide range of voices. And we're always asking ourselves, like, okay, we're representing this perspective, but to your point, what about folks who are not on the coast? How can we reach those communities? And so, or whatever they might be.
And also being mindful of who's not at the table. I'm always trying to think of, okay, we've got a great diverse team who's bringing in their perspectives and hopefully feel empowered to bring in their perspective, but who's not here, whose voice isn't getting heard, and how can we maybe tap into those communities? So, before Twitter became awful, or worse, I should say, it was a really good space to sort of listen to conversation of communities that are not our own. And so that was, I thought, really helpful.
Yeah, Reddit is one of our favorite forums. We just spend hours delving into those communities that exist on there.
Speaking of delving in, we have a whole bunch of audience questions from those of you who are watching now. And thank you for hanging in so far. We're going to get to some of these. And Reema, I want to stick with you for a minute, because we got a question that reminds me of a little YouTube video that we did before. So this is, I received pushback from a manager at my previous firm regarding pay transparency. I was up for promotion, but did not have any idea what a pay range looked like for escrow agents. She would not advise me, and when I was promoted, I didn't know if I was being compensated appropriately. How can we go about conversations with management regarding appropriate compensation? We talked a bit about how, as colleagues, we can support each other regarding appropriate compensation. But Reema, what about when you need to talk to managers?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think you want to go into a meeting with a manager with information and with questions for them. So, when you're sitting down with a manager and you're asking for a pay raise, I think you want to ask them, and you're trying to understand, where they're coming from. I think just ask them, right? Ask them how your pay is determined. Ask if there is a pay range for your position and where you fall on that pay range and why. So in other words, you want to understand how your employer is arriving at your salary and what the pay structure is like. And, ideally they'll be able to give you some info around that. And if they aren't answering your questions, or that's not really getting anywhere, you want to come to that meeting, again, like I said, with information based on your own research and conversations, and with colleagues, with other people in the industry, to get a sense of where you actually do, where you think you fairly fall on it, so that you can come equipped with that and have that conversation with them. Those are the main things. And I think you can go as far as sharing with your employer, this is the information that I got, and this is what I think I should be paid. This is how much I can get at X company, or at doing X at a different, doing this position somewhere else. And, that can be an effective tactic. So yeah, those are some of the main things that come to mind. Anything else that you'd like to add, Kimberly?
Use the internet for research. A lot of times you can find, pay compensations, but that doesn't really help if your manager is, honestly, if your manager is acting like that, start looking for a different job.
Right.
It's 2023. We don't have to keep putting up with managers that are terrible and like that toxic about, if a manager is trying to make you feel badly for talking about fair and adequate compensation, that's a red flag. Get out of there as soon as you can.
Yeah.
Find a different place to be an escrow agent.
Yeah. And I would just add there, it's you want to be able to feel like you're confident and that the people are supporting you and you have growth potential. And part of growth potential is money and being able to confidently stay in a job. And I just, from a manager's perspective, is your manager doesn't recognize how annoying it is to replace someone who's good, then you need to hit the trail.
Yeah. We have another question from Brett H. And I'll ask this one of you, Meredith. What challenges do you face as a female journalist that your male counterparts do not?
Well, I found at the beginning of my career, it was way harder to build camaraderie amongst some of my colleagues that were above me. And I didn't mean in a fun outside of work way. I just felt I was not included in the circles, the casual water cooler talks that built that camaraderie. If you're not into sports, or if you didn't go to the same college, it can be tough to break into there. So that was the beginning, but I have seen a definite change. I was, working in a newsroom during the Me Too era, when it was addressed. And part of that was, away from the sexual impropriety, but just how abusive workplaces can be sometimes with yelling and there was this feeling for a bit that was just like, you just got to put up with the yelling and the abusive and the name calling, etc. And that's how it is. And I've seen that sea change, which has been nice. And I certainly don't want to repeat that, which has been affirming.
Yeah. Anything you want to add on that, Reema?
As a reporter, especially early on, I got some not nice feedback from just even listeners of folks who had problems with the way I pronounce things or how young I sound, things that I wasn't seeing my male colleagues who were my age getting that, similar feedback. So yeah, that was a pretty explicit way. I think, I've reported abroad in Turkey and Egypt and have experienced just a lot of sexism in that, doing that, right? Folks maybe not taking me as seriously or saying inappropriate things. I kind of, that just becomes part of the job. And sometimes when you're out in the field, unfortunately, online harassment is also a thing. I haven't really experienced that, but I have, colleagues who have experienced that. I'm sure, yeah. Have you, Kimberly?
No, I was just saying knock on wood that you don't. But speaking of Egypt, we have a question in the chat of what is the background on the painting behind you, including the artist and who, if anyone, the painting portrays. And so you can also see my cat who's sleeping. That's Jasper. But this painting is by an Egyptian artist named Fatna Galal. I bought it in Egypt when I was living there and working as a reporter there. And it portrays Nubian women, just sort of generic Nubian women. And those are women from southern Egypt that are considered, it's supposed to be a representation of sort of women from the countryside. And so I saw it in Egypt and I loved it and I bought it and I brought it back with me to the US. So.
I love that. I was so obnoxious to say, but I was at an Indian village not too long ago.
Well, there you go.
No,
Flex.
I was in Southern Egypt. That's amazing.
Another question from the live Q&A. When my partner introduced me to Marketplace, my appreciation for the economy grew. Was there a singular source or a general interest that led you to your own appreciation of the economy? And, you know, to stay on the Egypt kick, actually, when I first started reporting from Egypt in 2006, 2007, I got one of the jobs I could get was writing for an English language business magazine. And at first I was like, oh my gosh, how am I going to come up with any business and economic stories? And it took me about 5 minutes to realize that every story is a business and economic story. Every story has a money angle to it. And that once you sort of get into that mindset, every story is a business and economic story. So that's how it was for me. What about you two?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I literally took my answer. You know, on the show, I remember when we first started it, I was like, oh, are we gonna have enough story ideas? I mean, there are plenty of story ideas. I mean, money touches everything, right? We've done stories about education, about
Teeth.
Yeah.
about, you know, just everything, right? Their financial implications. And so yeah, and similarly, you know, I was reporting a lot on immigrant communities, on refugee populations when I first came to Marketplace, and that was a window in which I, you know, really began to see the economy and you know, reporting on their contributions to the economy and just how important they are. That I think was really eye-opening. And you know, what we were just talking about with salary transparency, that's something that we all, I mean, a lot of us in the workplace can experience. You know, we have direct experiences with. And just thinking about how, you know, we might be talking about maybe a few $1,000s or whatever, but that has huge impacts, right? That's not only money people are taking home, but it's their ability to build wealth and intergenerational wealth. And so just seeing how all these small, you know, day-to-day things really have a compounding effect is something I think about a lot.
What was your moment, Meredith?
Well, mine was within just the 2008 financial crisis.
Oh,
and I was
wow,
in
yeah.
college and just seeing how for the first time, kind of peeling the back of the onion of how that stretched out and how it continues, the repercussions continue to this day. So that was what really piqued my interest into first reporting on it. This.
Okay, we are winding down. So rapid fire, ladies. Final question from Molly M. What story has given you the biggest sense of hope that women will be okay? I'll go first.
Yeah,
I'll go first.
Yeah.
It didn't have the best outcome, but watching the women in Iran over the last year, just say absolutely not, no longer in against incredible odds was amazingly inspiring, and seeing other women around the world rally around them, that gave me hope. Watching the turnout of young women in the midterm elections and the organizing efforts, especially around reproductive rights as a galvanizing issue, and watching people say, we are taking ownership of this and we're not going to accept the status quo and make those demands. Those two stories really stuck with me.
I will use that same answer. No.
Okay. That's fine.
I agree with you. I think, you know, and some of the stats that we've been sharing earlier today, just seeing how much women are rising in certain positions. You know, I think I saw an article this morning even about how women CEOs run more than, you know, 10% of Fortune 500 companies for the first time in history. So yeah, those are heartening ways that we're seeing women rise into positions of power.
Meredith, you get the final word.
Well, the mic drop on terms of Iranian women, but I would just say to harken back to, you know, for me, seeing changes in workplace in terms of equality post Me Too is very empowering and something I hope continues.
Well, thank you both so much, Meredith and Reema. And I have to say to those of you in the audience, thank you for the great questions. And just to remind everyone that these kind of inclusive conversations and our journalism about the economy, inequality, the role of women, where we get left out, and bringing those voices in, all of this is free. And one of the things I love about Marketplace is we're pretty much the only high quality business and economic news that's free. You don't need a cable subscription. You don't need a newspaper subscription. You can't, it's not like you can only read or listen to 2 articles before you have to, sign up and pay. And, we vet our information so carefully, and we really do work hard to bring people highest quality information that we can. And we can only do this for free for people because folks like you are willing to support us. And Marketplace is on a mission to raise the economic intelligence of the entire country. And it's our loyal listeners that allow us to do that. And that makes you a part of that mission to raise the economic intelligence of America. And your donations are one of our biggest revenue streams. And look, I'm sure you all have seen the headlines of all the layoffs in media organizations across the country. NPR stopped its internship program. Vox is having layoffs. Here at Marketplace, thanks to our supporters, we're keeping our staff, we're keeping our internship programs, we're keeping this content going because of you all. And those donations are really what allow that to happen. And so please, if you can, give what you are able to today. Marketplace.org/donate. Once again, that's marketplace.org/donate. I'm sure you will get an email about it as well. But I just want to thank everyone so much for your time today, and to wish you all once again, happy International Women's Day. Bye all.